violence is always wonderful. It's always great to see that Zim's getting beaten around, and Zim has to solve his problems. Jonah wasn't a big fan of that. He always hated it that Zim was enabled at all. I don't know what he wanted. He never offered a solution. I don't know if he wanted Zim to actually be beaten up constantly, but then, he didn't like his own writing. There'd be Zim solving problems, and when he saw it on the screen, he didn't like it that Zim solved problems. Everybody in the series was always supposed to be hopeless and kind of doltish, and it was a pity, really, because it just seemed like nothing happened with a purpose, or nobody actually, there was no heroes in this whole series. And while that appeals to a certain few, it doesn't appeal overall. You want to get the feeling that somebody overcomes things. People just don't wander into solutions left and right. Things don't just happen randomly. And on Zim, it sort of became that. There was just dolts doing things randomly would solve problems. And it became sort of a question of like, well, why am I even watching? Or, what's the point? You don't feel like you're growing or working with these characters. You're not seeing them, figuring things out. They just blunder into things. What a great ending. He just jettisons a kid through this room. Very creepy ending. I love creepy endings. Oh boy. This is Bloaty's Pizza Hog. Really, it was quite a mess of a show. Came together rather awkwardly. Jonah and Rob's show. I mean, I think their writing was okay. Dave Crocker and Chris Graham got together on the show, and it really was one of the most lackluster productions that we had in the first season. At least the first part of the first season. It's great, Gaz's little exorcist moment. But Chris always is always complaining that this is just the worst show, and it was the worst show that he worked on. It was his worst effort. I disagree. I think it was Hobo 13, but this really wasn't a great show. A lot was missing in this episode. But it was fun to see sort of this whole Gaz and Dib working together against Zim episode. And it was a nice touch. I like that Jonah brought in the Bloaty's character and the Bloaty's influence over Gaz. But it was really it's a string of just arbitrary shots. It was too much to work up in the end, and it ended up becoming what it was, which is just, passable at best. That was very nice having that sign, the 2 hours later dissolve like that, disperse out. We should have done a bit more of that in the show. It's funny, Membrane was always supposed to be a sort of a superhero character. At least that's how Jonan always described him, and yet he never appeared to be one. He was always this thin, weedy-looking character. He looked like a pervert all the time. Half the time he wasn't even wearing pants underneath that skirt of his, or whatever you want to call it, that lab coat, I guess. It's interesting to see all those, like, just the monitor lines on that little watch. Those are just 3D editions. 3D could be that simple, or it could be as complex as those planets floating around, the planets and spaceships and planet jackers. Oh, gee. More violence. It's great to see violence in kids' cartoons. I don't know what the problem is. Fox has started to show a lot more anime on their channel these days, and they have all this great violence going on. I just think it's wonderful. I don't think the kids should be beating each other up, or that there should be really, violence should be lauded. But there is violence. I remember as a kid, there are always kids beating each other up. There are always threats of violence going on. My brother and I would beat the hell out of each other. You know, but yet you can't show it in a kids' cartoon. And yeah, it's funny because ever since they started making kids' cartoons less violent, the kids actually started playing with guns and becoming more violent. So, what does that mean? I think under Jonan's direction, Bloaty was supposed to be the most disgusting thing in the world, and these kids were supposed to be the most obnoxious and disgusting children ever. It's funny. Garrett's got all these weapons capabilities. We never see it again, though. Never uses them. It's a cute little sequence with Gaz and Gur interacting. I don't know how well this played off. I remember we had a lot of problems convincing people. It's supposed to be a whole transition where she disappears out of one tube into another, and you see that the tubes have changed, but only very slightly. The background has changed, and then you realize that it's the same setup, but she's been teleported to a space station. Well, there you go. I guess you can't miss that. Oof. Just even that transition from 2D to 3D was pretty horrible. Ugh. You can see occasionally on the pans, like that pan there, as you see Gaz running across, you see a little jump here and there. You'll just see it stutter. You'll see a little one-frame jump, and it'll jerk the pan. That's our speed up, in effect, because we had to speed up the show several minutes. Oh, that Earth back there. That Earth should have been 3D. This is all where the 3D budget got pulled back. It's so sad. Oof. As again, it's just one of these shows that sort of slipped through the cracks. Just not a lot of attention given to it. Not a lot of care put in. It's disgusting. What is she holding and what's dripping out of it? It was nice. I think this section of the series was pretty cool because you started to get into Dib and Gaz a little bit, and you still didn't like cut Zim out of the story. It was Dib and Gaz versus Zim, which I think that this the premise for this basic idea had been written when the series started, and it came to fruition as this specific story here, obviously. Great little transition. Boy, that teleporter shot. I forget what the problem was. We had that redone like 4 or 5 times. I remember the revisions on this episode were just very difficult to deal with. I remember Louis doing a lot of work, and it was just a lot of effort on a lot of people's parts to pull this episode together and make it work. This end sequence here. I think Chris Graham did this 3D sequence. He did the action. He was